Welcome back to the Gridiron Expert. It's time to talk about the playoff. 4 teams all fighting for a spot in the national championship game. And we're going to start with our first semifinal game, the Rose Bowl, being played in Arlington at Jerry's World, not out in Pasadena at the real Rose Bowl, but the Rose Bowl between number 4 Notre Dame and number 1 Alabama. Again, a spot in the national championship on the line. And this is just going to be a great battle, guys, between 2 historic programs. 2 blue blood college football programs, a rich history of winning, a rich tradition at both of these schools. And of course, we're here to break down everything you need to know about both of these teams, everything you need to know about this matchup, and who we have advancing to the national championship game. So you look at this, guys. Alabama won the last meeting back in January of 2013. They won that meeting. The national championship over the Fighting Irish won that game 42-14. And the Crimson Tide are huge favorites in this game again. I think they were pretty heavy favorites the first time around many years ago. They're heavy favorites again. 19.5-point favorites as it stands of this filming. 19.5-point favorites. That's insane for a college football playoff game. The question really is, can Notre Dame get over the hump? Can they finally show up in a big game? I mean, you look at their recent performances, not just the national championship loss to Alabama back in January of 13, but the loss to Clemson in the ACC title game just a few weeks ago, a blowout loss to the Tigers, blowout loss to Clemson back in the college football playoff in 2017. You had the 2015 Fiesta Bowl. They lost to Ohio State. They have not won a New Year's Six caliber bowl game. Notre Dame has not won a New Year's Six caliber bowl game, guys, since January 1st, 1994, when they took down Texas A&M in the Cotton Bowl. So let that sink in a little bit. Notre Dame, a rich history of winning, rich history of tradition, always up there, usually in the top 10, contending for these New Year's Six bowl spots, contending for a national title, but they've never been able to win that big game, or at least really haven't for the last 26 years. Can that change down in Arlington? Let's take a look at the offenses for both teams, and that's going to be a big one because Alabama has arguably the best offense in the entire country. Looking at the Crimson Tide right now, you're lucky if you have 1 Heisman finalist on your team. Alabama has 2 Heisman finalists on their team in Mac Jones and Devontae Smith, the dynamic quarterback and wide receiver duo. The Crimson Tide are averaging 49.7 points per game, 543.9 yards per game. And look at the stats from the 2 finalists, guys. We'll start with Mac Jones. He's thrown for over 3,700 yards, 32 touchdowns, just 4 interceptions. I think he's done a fantastic job filling the shoes left by Tua Tagovailoa. You look at Devontae Smith, who, if you ask me, is the best player in the country. If you ask me, he deserves to win the Heisman Trophy. I mean, these stats are unreal. 98 receptions, over 1,500 reception yards, 17 reception touchdowns. Let's add on a punt return for a touchdown. Let's add on a rushing touchdown, so 19 total touchdowns. This guy's unreal. Mac Jones deserves a lot of the credit too, but Devontae Smith, to me, is the best player in the country. He would be receiving my Heisman vote if I got to cast one. So that's the biggest names you want to watch out for in Alabama's offense. And let's keep in mind, too, that's the quarterback, that's the wide receiver. Jalen Waddle might be back. And then you've got Najee Harris. One of the best, if not the best running back in the country. Over 1,200 rushing yards this year. 24 rushing touchdowns, leads all FBS running backs in rushing touchdowns. Alabama's averaging 189.8 rushing yards per game. They've scored at least 38 points in every game this year. They've scored at least 42 points in each of their last 5 games. This offense is unstoppable. I don't know if anybody can slow them down. I really, really don't. You look at Notre Dame and you want to look at their offense. Can they keep up? If this game just kind of comes down to a shootout, if it's drive for drive, score for score, can Notre Dame and the Fighting Irish keep up with Alabama and this offense? One thing I'll give Notre Dame and Brian Kelly, one thing I will give them is they're very efficient, they're very balanced, they're very methodical with their offense. They're not going to blow you out of the water. They're not the flashiest, the fastest, the most exciting, but they are efficient. They're averaging 35.2 points per game, 237.5 passing yards per game, and 217.6 rushing yards per game. So again, they're efficient. They're not as great as Alabama. I don't know if anybody is. They're not as fast as Alabama, but they are efficient. And that's going to be a key in this one, guys. We know Alabama can score lightning fast. But when Notre Dame gets the ball, can they slowly but surely work their way down the field, keep Alabama off the field, and then, of course, make sure they get points out of it. Make sure the Fighting Irish get points out of it. We know that Notre Dame is led by their quarterback, Ian Book, who finished in the top 10 of the Heisman votes. So he's had a pretty dang good season. Surprised a lot of people by coming back for this 2020 season. He's thrown for over 2,600 yards, 15 touchdowns, just 2 interceptions. So Jones and Book, a fantastic job of taking care of the football. Book has also rushed for over 400 yards and 8 touchdowns. So 23 total touchdowns, over 3,000 total yards for Ian Book this year. He is the key, I really think, for this Notre Dame offense. But you also look at their running game. A run game, major reason why their offense has been so efficient and so tough to stop this year, led by Kyren Williams. Rushed for over 1,000 yards this year, 12 touchdowns. But the problem is he was held to 50, just 50 rushing yards in that ACC championship against Clemson. The first time he played Clemson, he rushed for 140 yards and 3 touchdowns. So that's a major concern here, is can Notre Dame remain balanced? We know they have the players to do it, but can they remain balanced against a good, and I mean good, Alabama defense? I know what a lot of people are going to say. You're going to say, well, how are they good? They just allowed 46 points to Florida. I think most defenses in the country would have allowed that many points to Florida. I mean, we're talking Kyle Trask, another Heisman finalist, Kyle Pitts, Kadarius Toney, Trayvon Grimes, and Dan Mullen, an offensive and quarterback guru. 46 points, and yet Alabama still got the win. Let's keep in mind that in the previous 5 games prior to the SEC championship, Alabama was allowing 7.2 points per game. Say what you want about their opponents, Auburn, Arkansas, LSU, Mississippi State, guys like that. Still, about a touchdown per game over the previous 5. It's pretty dang good. This defense is good, and they are tough, and Notre Dame's going to have a tough time moving against this defense. Crimson Tide allowing just 19.5 points per game on the year. Big number you need to look at here. A couple of them, but the biggest one is the fact they're only allowing 107.6 rushing yards per game. You remember, Clemson last week had one of the top rushing defenses in the country. They still do. And when they were at full strength, they shut down Kyren Williams. They shut down Kyren Williams and forced Notre Dame to really, they were one-dimensional and really struggled to move the ball. Struggled to certainly punch it in the end zone. Didn't score their first touchdown till about 8 minutes remaining in the fourth quarter when the game was far out of reach. So Alabama's only allowing a little over 100 rushing yards per game, which means Notre Dame's got to find a way to get creative. They've got to find a way to move the ball and get Kyren Williams some success. They've got to find a way to block up front. And that's going to be another problem here for Notre Dame. Alabama has 33 sacks this season. 22 of those 33, so 2/3 of their sacks have come in the last 4 games. This defensive line is getting high. They're getting really high. And you look at Notre Dame, they just allowed 6 sacks to Clemson in that ACC championship game. Ian Book had nowhere to go, was constantly under pressure. So they had a horrible performance against a very good Clemson defensive front. Alabama's might be even better. 22 sacks in their last 4 games, and you're going up against Notre Dame offensive line that's usually pretty good, but hasn't looked like it, hasn't played like it in the last few weeks. So those are all things that favor Alabama and things that would be concerning if I were a Fighting Irish fan, if I were the Fighting Irish as a whole. This Alabama defense, don't pay much attention to what happened against Florida. Most teams would allow those numbers to the Gators. Again, up there. It's one of the top offenses in the country. The entire body of work for the Crimson Tide, one of the best in the country. You look at Notre Dame's defense. They're still up there as one of the top defenses in the country. Top 25 unit. They're allowing 18.6 points per game. Just 335.1 yards per game. So that is actually less than Alabama. Alabama's allowing about 25 more yards per game than Notre Dame. But then you look at the rest of the numbers here. Look at the rest of the numbers. Notre Dame's allowing 224.5 passing yards per game. That number's a little bit concerning to me. Going up against Mac Jones, Devontae Smith, and the rest of the Crimson Tide. The one number that does benefit Notre Dame, same as it did for Alabama, is the fact the Fighting Irish are allowing just 110.5 rushing yards per game. So in theory, both run games are going to have their hands full. Najee Harris and Kyron Williams both may struggle to find success, at least early on in this game. Although I will say this, we said the same thing a few weeks ago when Notre Dame faced off against Travis Etienne and Clemson. Remember, first time they met, Notre Dame shut down Etienne, held him to 85 total yards. That's rushing and receiving. Well, against them in the ACC title game, Clemson rushed for 219 yards. Etienne had a little over $120. So if that happened in the ACC title game, now you're going up against a better offensive line in Alabama. You're going up against a better running back in Najee Harris. If the Fighting Irish don't figure things out quickly, they're going to get torched both through the air and on the ground. Two key players you have to look at for Notre Dame right now on the defensive side of the ball. Again, defense is there. Clark Lee is a great defensive coordinator. There's a reason that Vanderbilt just hired him as their new head coach. This Fighting Irish defense can get the job done. They're going to need a big game from Kyle Hamilton, their safety that has led a secondary that has 17 takeaways this year. The defense as a whole has 17 takeaways. Had that interception off of Trevor Lawrence in the title game too. And you've got Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah at linebacker, who has led a front seven that has 30 sacks this year. Owusu-Koramoah, he's the big name on this Notre Dame defense. Probably, I would say, the leader of this Notre Dame defense. And he's got to go out there, have a big day. He's got to lead the charge in stopping Najee Harris, trying to lead the charge into pressuring Mac Jones just a little bit for the Fighting Irish to have any chance in getting stops in this one and trying to give their offense a chance to keep up with the Crimson Tide, because we know Alabama's going to put some points up. The two big players you got to look at there. Again, the numbers are not bad for Notre Dame, but the way they played against Clemson a few weeks ago is concerning. The way they played against Clemson is concerning because I think many people could argue that Alabama right now is better than Clemson, at least numbers-wise and the way that they are playing. So let's look at the keys to the game, guys. Again, Notre Dame, no one is giving the Fighting Irish a fighting chance. Why would they? You just lost by 24 in your conference championship game, and many people said, oh, Notre Dame shouldn't be in the playoff. Well, they should. I will say that. They should be in the playoff. The entire body of work over the entire course of the season, one bad performance should not keep them out. I know it was a conference title game. I know it was against Clemson. But still, they did not deserve to drop out. They deserve to be playing in this Rose Bowl for a shot at the national title. But their first key to the game here, guys, is to air it out. Air it out with Ian Book. And I'll explain why. Again, they are not giving anybody, no one's giving them a chance. And I get you can't just go out there and just play wildly. Brian Kelly can't just go out there and say, you know what, we're going to go for it every time. We're going to air it out nonstop. You've got to stick to your game plan. You've got to go out there and play the way you would normally. But again, you've got to be able to take risks, and you've got to be able to convert on those risks to beat Alabama. And I'm saying air it out because I can promise you Notre Dame will not win this game on the ground. The Crimson Tide have allowed just two 100-yard rushers this season. Over the entire season, just two 100-yard rushers. Both of those came in the same game to Ole Miss, which was arguably Alabama's worst defensive performance of the year. After that bad performance against Ole Miss, the defense changed for the better, and they've been one of the best in the country. So only two 100-yard rushers this year, both of those coming in the same game. Notre Dame will not win the game on the ground with Kyron Williams. He'll be lucky if he hits 100 yards. I think he'll be lucky if he hits 80 yards in this game. He's held to 50 against Clemson a few weeks ago. You've got to air it out with Ian Book. You have to continue to move the chains. You have to keep your drives alive, because if you continue to go 3 and out, you continue just to constantly give the ball back to Alabama, your defense is going to get run down. They're already facing a tough enough test against this offense. You put a worn down defense out there, you don't stand a chance. You've got to air it out with Ian Book. You've got to convert your throws. You've got to convert the first downs. You've got to get the ball in the end zone. And for their defense, they've got to stop Najee Harris. The passing game is good enough as it is. Mac Jones, Devontae Smith, that connection is one that I don't know if anybody can stop. Again, but Najee Harris in that SEC championship game proved that he wasn't just a runner. He was a pass threat too. He had, 3 reception touchdowns in that game against Florida? All of those first of the year? 3 reception touchdowns, had no reception touchdowns in any of the games prior to that. Alabama's going to incorporate Harris into the passing game again in this Rose Bowl. If you can limit him the way Notre Dame limited Etienne in their first meeting, and make Alabama one-dimensional with that passing attack, which could, again, arguably one of the best, if not the best in the country, at least Notre Dame can hone in on that. At least they can focus solely on the pass, knowing that Harris might not be much of a factor. That's what they have to do. If I'm Notre Dame, I'm playing the way I did the first time we played against Clemson, bottling up the run, taking away their star running back, focusing solely on the passing game. Who cares if we give up chunk yards? We're making them one-dimensional, and our offense is going to try to do the rest. That's what the Fighting Irish have to do in this one if they want a chance to win. Alabama, what do they have to do? Well, the first thing is they've got to have good pass protection. They've got to have good pass protection. You remember in the SEC championship game, they lost their center. They lost their center, Landon Dickerson. That was a heartbreaking loss for the Crimson Tide. You know you're a big team player when the entire team comes over to you after your injury, patting you on the shoulder, giving you words of encouragement. So that's a big loss for the Crimson Tide, but also some motivation to go out there and win for their teammate. But you lose your center. That's a big deal. I think you underestimate those offensive linemen, especially the guy that's snapping the ball to your quarterback. You've got to have some good pass protection here because, again, Notre Dame has 30 sacks. Owusu-Koramoah, he's going to get after Mac Jones. So protect Mac Jones, open up the lanes for Najee Harris, give Jones time to throw. That's key number one. Key number two is to pressure Ian Book. You get after Ian Book, you force some mistakes, whether it's sacks, interceptions, a couple fumbles, or even if you just force, long situations, second and long, third and long, you're going to be just fine. Again, Notre Dame gave up 6 sacks to Clemson a couple weeks ago in the ACC title game. Alabama has 22 sacks in their last 4 games, 33 on the year. Front 7 is unreal, and if that Fighting Irish offensive line hasn't figured anything out, then they're not going to stand a chance again in this game because Ian Book will constantly be under pressure. They're not going to be able to air it out, which is one of our keys to the game, and it might be over by halftime. So those are the keys for Alabama in this one. So what is going to happen in this game, guys? The Rose Bowl, not the traditional Rose Bowl that we're used to, the Rose Bowl live from Arlington, thanks to COVID-19. We're obviously picking Alabama. I think if you've listened to this entire video, if you've listened to the numbers, if you've watched both teams play, you know that Alabama has a significant edge just about everywhere. And look, I'm not going to dog on Notre Dame here. I won't dog on Notre Dame at all. No one's giving them a chance, and I genuinely don't see how Notre Dame wins this game. But again, I don't know if anybody can beat Alabama this year. You put Ohio State at number 4, I don't think they beat Alabama. I don't think it's that close. Say A&M gets in at number 4. They don't beat Alabama. It's not close. Iowa State, not going to happen. Cincinnati, not going to happen. Georgia, not going to happen. Oklahoma, not going to happen. You put any team in at that number 4 spot to play Alabama, they're not beating the Crimson Tide, and more than likely it's going to be a blowout. This Alabama team is just too good. Only team that might have a chance to beat them, honestly, is Clemson if they can get past Ohio State. So we are picking Alabama to win the Rose Bowl. I think they win it convincingly. 19.5-point spread going into this one, guys, and I would not be shocked in the slightest if the Crimson Tide cover that and they potentially cover it with ease. It's going to take a dang near perfect game for Notre Dame to just stay close in this one, and they're certainly going to have a couple lucky breaks go their way if they want to pull off an upset for the ages. I just don't see it happening, though. So Alabama winning the Rose Bowl, back in the college football playoff after missing out last year, and they will once again be back in the national championship, and will await the winner of Clemson and Ohio State. So guys, thank you so much for watching us here at The Gridiron Expert on YouTube. Make sure to continue to like, comment, subscribe, and share our videos. And also, make sure to check us out down in the description below. We have so much additional college football content for you. It's unreal. We've got GE merchandise, brand new GE merchandise that you do not want to miss. We've got our expert picks. We are hot. I'm talking hot against the spread right now for our bold picks. Check that out on our website, thegridironexpert.com. Check out our newsletter on thegridironexpert.com, our Patreon account, our BetNow offers. Very exclusive, very beneficial if you are a betting man or woman. So make sure you go check that out. You do not want to miss it. Everything right down there in the description. And once again, guys, as always, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time right here on The Gridiron Expert.